And I will actually don't see the live stream. Wait, hold on. Yeah, I don't see a live stream functionality here.
Well, that's fine. We can share out later.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for being here at the July edition of the Bay Area Regen Colab, hosted by Terran Collective. This is a series of calls that we started doing once it was not safe to gather in person. And we've been doing these monthly for over a year now, and featuring amazing humans in the Bay Area bioregion who are doing really cool work, including the membership of Terran Collective, which is a community of care and practice, building systems and tools to foster trust and collaboration, starting in the Bay Area bioregion. And it's like a digital potluck. We've had opportunities to share asks and offers and updates from members of our community who are working on caring for our communities and healing them in whatever ways called to our care. And today, we're going to be hearing from Kevin Bayuk, who is a person that I respect a lot and a leader in the permaculture community. And before we get into Kevin and what he's bringing, I want to take a moment to invite us all into coherence through a breath. So let's do a 3-breath anchor together. And, you're invited to join me or not. Close your eyes if you wish. And we're going to take a deep inhale and we'll be exhaling through the mouth. So I'm closing my eyes, inhaling through the nose, and exhaling with an audible ha. As you do that, ha, just like relax, which has maybe been clenched today as you go about your day. This is the time to relax. And another inhale. Ha. And one more. Ha. Thank you, everyone. Here we are. And now that we've arrived, I would like to give a land acknowledgement. So what I want to say is that Terran Collective lives and works in the ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush and Chochenyo Ohlone people, as well as the Coast Miwok, the Bay Miwok, and Karkin peoples. And the lands that they steward and have stewarded, we rely on the ecological well-being of these lands that make up our bioregion, and we're committed to healing them and to returning them to stewardship by their ancestral peoples. We furthermore acknowledge that we benefit from systems of oppression that perpetuate violence against Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and violence against this land and our more than human relations that we share it with. And we seek to dismantle these systems through our work and to restore a right relationship with all our kin so that all beings may thrive. And our mission at Terran Collective is to amplify cooperation among people regenerating our communities and our planet. So, thank you all for receiving that. And now I want to set some context about what we're chatting about today and introduce Kevin more thoroughly. So a big theme that we've been following in these conversations is about bioregionalism, something that a lot of us care about, and which is just the idea that we have a landscape that we share that's defined by features of the natural world, as well as human communities and the communities of all of our kin in this land. And with the Bay Area, we have this wonderful, huge bay. We have this huge network of rivers that make up our watershed. If we consider ourselves the larger Shasta bioregion, we have the Central Valley and we have the mountains that form this land. And all of us who live in this land together are in a community with each other. And as that community, we can be stewards all together and making decisions together about how we live in community together and how we take care of this resource that we all share and all depend on. And there's a lot of ways that we're exploring this theme of bioregionalism. But after one of our conversations about it, I think it was actually after our last conversation last month, which featured Carrie, who's here, talking about integral bioregionalism, Kevin reached out and actually volunteered himself to share with us on the topic of permaculture, which is very deeply related to bioregionalism, and the history of the permaculture movement in the Bay Area, as well as the threads on bioregionalism, which is what originally drew him to be in the Bay Area, at least in part. So Kevin is a wonderful human who is, he says from his bio online that he works at the intersection of ecology and economy, where permaculture design meets cooperative organizations, intent on meeting human needs while enhancing the conditions conducive to all life. He is a partner with Lift Economy, which is a great organization that many of us have received education from, which accelerates social enterprises and facilitates investment into beneficial impact organizations. And he facilitates classes, he speaks, and he gives mentoring as part of his work with the Urban Permaculture Institute. I also read somewhere that Kevin is a fellow of Project Drawdown. And yeah, works across a variety of sectors advising on sustainability, permaculture, and yeah, a long list of impressive things. Conservation, hydrology, landscape stewardship, bioplastics, compost, early stage impact investing. So you can see that Kevin has a very diverse set of expertise and skills that he shares with the world. And so Kevin wrote to me and he said that he had read about Peter Berg's work on bioregionalism and permaculture 1. And Peter Berg is the founder of the Planet Drum Foundation, which has been a leader for many decades in sharing ideas about bioregionalism. And his work came up last month in Carrie's talk to us as well. And learning about Peter Berg's work was part of the motivation for Kevin to come to San Francisco and get to know Peter and Judy in the early 90s. So this work has been going on for a long time, and Kevin has been a part of it in the Bay Area for a long time, and so has a lot of stories to share about how bioregionalism and permaculture have evolved and what has happened in this space over the course of many, many decades. So he graciously offered to share about all of this, as well as give us a little refresher on permaculture. And yeah, so we're going to learn a lot. Thank you so much, Kevin, for being here. And I give the floor to you.
Thank you, Claire. I feel very privileged and honored to be able to share, and just want to express my gratitude to the Terran Collective and to all of you. As an organizer, it's a Wednesday evening in the summer, and there's so many things that you all could be doing with your time and energy, and to commit your energy to be here together, to learn, to share. I like to see that and acknowledge that as an extraordinary choice. So I just want to express my sincere gratitude for everybody's attention and our sharing together. I also want to acknowledge that I'm zooming in from Ramaytush territory, the unceded territory, the Leulamu people. It's also known as San Francisco. And I heard on the last call, some questions about what does it mean to be an uninvited occupier on unceded territory, and what does that mean in terms of how to act? What do we do with our behavior? And I want to humbly confess that I don't have the answer to that question, but in consultation with elders and indigenous peoples, both here in our local bioregion, but also I've had the honor and privilege to work with members of the Anishinaabe tribe, the Ojibwa, the Dene, as well as the Oglala Lakota Some of the things that I've learned is to be humble and recognize that we are an uninvited, as if we were an uninvited guest. So imagine if somebody came into your home as an uninvited guest. What would you like for that person? How would you like for that person to be? How would you like for them to treat your home? What would you like for them to leave behind? And with that as an kind of attitude and to inform our actions, how we walk on the land, how we steward our gardens, our spaces, and honor this place and honor the legacy of the existing stewardship of literally thousands of years of presence from the original inhabitants. Again, I don't really have the answers, but I know that it definitely informs my actions. I do want to call out that for any of you who live in San Francisco, there are opportunities to be associated in partnership with the Association of Ramatush Ohlone, and to see their projects around arts and culture, community and restoration and research. And there's opportunities to contribute as well financially and with your energy. And in particular, the Ramatush Ohlone have the Unikin land tax, which I pay as an uninvited occupier. But I also dedicate my energy to learning more and humbly participating in the various projects that the original inhabitants have developed and continue to produce. And so each area of wherever you might be zooming in from or wherever you may reside, there may be similar projects to become aware of. With that, I wanted to kind of just check maybe in the chat. Oh, great. I see, Stephanie, you're talking to Greg Castro about the project and hopefully the one at San Gregorio Creek. I wanted to check and see, scale of 1 to 5, how familiar are you with the term permaculture? 1, permaculture, is that a hairdo thing? Perma what? 5, like you've done a permaculture design certificate training, you're super literate and you're happy to share and you practice permaculture principles in your life. If you could just put in the chat, I just kind of want to see where we're at. Okay, great, good, nice. Excellent. Okay, good. So kind of a high degree of literacy here. I really appreciate the feedback. I do, I thought it would be interesting to share a little bit as an introduction to permaculture, but I might go through it kind of accelerated to speak to more of the intersections of permaculture and bioregional literacy, bioregionalism in the Bay Area. It's great to see Rains here amongst others who can back me up on some of the historical sharing that I might offer. But introducing kind of some of my how permaculture lands for me. When I on the last session, I heard kind of I heard some expression of I wish there was a pedagogy or a learning experience to learn how to be more integrated into the bioregion, and that resonated really deeply with me because I had and have been asking that question of myself for a couple of decades now, at least. And in all my searching, permaculture design and the pedagogy of the learning experience of adopting permaculture principles and ethics is the closest thing I've found to a very coherent, cohesive, and fairly comprehensive approach to transforming my habits, behaviors, and norms to integrate into the bioregion within which I reside. And so I thought, wow, this might be a great, if for those who might not be aware of it, it might be good to kind of explore at least how permaculture has grabbed me. And I did mention that, I think it was Permaculture 1, which was published, I think in the late 70s, references a book by Kirkpatrick Sale that references Peter Berg and the Planet Drum Foundation's Re-inhabiting a Separate Country. And that's, so permaculture led me to bioregionalism. There's a whole chapter in the Permaculture Designer's Manual kind of about bioregionalism that furthered kind of my curiosity and desire to learn more. But I think, as Claire mentioned, there's a tight intersection, and hopefully that'll become evident as we kind of look at permaculture through the way I might introduce it. So if you'll indulge me, I'm going to share my screen and show some images and that kind of thing, and hopefully maybe just do a little bit of a small exercise. But as we go here, let's go ahead and dive in. So permaculture, if I had to, there's some images that I'll be showing, and there's lots of people to acknowledge, great workers both in the Bay Area and around the world who contribute to my knowledge of permaculture. And I think it's worth first acknowledging that permaculture, the word as a portmanteau or whatever they say, permanent in agriculture. And for any of the Buddhists on the line here, please don't get hung up on permanent. It's just means long standing. Like, so this idea of many generations, it's fine to be impermanent. But this idea of, if we looked at the principles behind the long-term human settlements, humans have lived in place for tens of thousands of years, though their climate is different and the characteristics of their bioregion are distinct, in principle, there's a lot of self-similarity for long-standing human culture. And if you tried to abstract those principles and put it in an ethical boundary, what would you call that as a system of design, a system of being? And these two white men from Australia, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, made the decision to coin a term, permaculture, with the idea that agriculture that influences the fibers we wear, the food we eat, the structure of our buildings, is the substance of all culture. So permanent agriculture is the same way of saying permanent culture, a human culture that could live long into the future, informed by a set of principles that is informed by how nature operates, and humans as nature, indigenous peoples and their indigenous wisdom, their lived wisdom from their way of being. And it's tricky because it is two white men, and I do acknowledge that it's problematic. And inventing a new term, there's a major risk of not acknowledging, or a major risk of it being cultural appropriation. And I do want to acknowledge that if you hold the critique of permaculture as you know it to be cultural appropriation, I think it's a valid critique. And I think in some cases there's contradiction in life, and I think there's opportunities to be informed and learn about permaculture. It's been a great value to my contribution to my life, but I acknowledge that its origins as a term and literature and study and the pedagogy could definitely be interpreted as cultural appropriation. I'm going to be checking the chat as I go, so feel free to chat in if there's critique or commentary or questions. And Claire or Tibet, if I could ask you to keep me honest if there's a comment that I miss in the chat that's really important, I'm happy to stop at any time. Thank you. So if I had to define permaculture, I would probably call it a way of meeting human needs abundantly in ways that don't take away from the environment that surrounds us and within which we live, but meeting human needs in ways that heal and regenerate and restore the very environment within which we live in and that surrounds us. So as an example, harvesting a yield of food, but when you look at the fertility and quality of the soil after the harvest, it hasn't just sustained its fertility or quality, and it hasn't been degraded. The quality of the soil in terms of its biodiversity and its fertility and ability to be fecund has actually increased. So the yield of food was achieved to meet human needs, but the soil is healthier. Or meeting our needs for water from a watershed without drying it and desiccating it and decimating the biodiversity of the watershed, but meeting human needs for water, which is one of our core needs, but doing it in a way that actually enhances and increases the biodiversity of the environment around us. And all of our human needs could be met in these ways that contribute to the conditions conducive to life. And one of the core ideas of permaculture, right, is that there's this ethical boundary to action. And this ethics are very explicit, because permaculture, when we talk about the principles, and some of you might be familiar with terms like biomimicry or ecological design, there's other schools or pedagogical approaches to design informed by nature, informed by ecology and relationships. But permaculture is very explicit with this ethics, and they're pretty simple as a boundary for our actions. Are we taking care of the earth? Are we taking care of people? And there's this tricky one at the end, which my friend and colleague Starhawk calls future care, this idea of, is there a fair share? Placing voluntary limits to consumption. So permaculture has within it an ethical commitment to what some people might describe as voluntary simplicity. And that runs pretty orthogonal or antithetical to a lot of our cultural norms that we might have been born into if you were born in the affluent world. So can somebody maybe either chat or off mute, what's an example, do you think, of earth care? How would you know you're taking care of the earth?
Improved soil, more fertility.
Great example. Thank you, Karen. Yeah. How about people care? How do we know if people are being taken care of? What's an example? Any ideas in the chat? What's that? Equality. Yeah. So equality, equity, everybody's needs being met. Everybody has food, water. How are we doing on earth care and people care? Like humanity. Right. It's an easy critique, right? Softball question. We are actually looking at an existential crisis, a biodiversity crisis, and there's enormous inequities. We have a certain percentage of people, a tiny sliver number of people going into space and playing around in Mars kind of thing. And then we have 800 million people who will be malnourished and hungry tomorrow and today, and 900 million people without an adequate supply of water, for fresh water for their needs or sanitation. An embarrassment of inequity. So this ethical boundary helps us orient our behaviors. But what do we mean by permaculture design? There's principles, and I'm not going to go through, definitely not going to go through all of them, but there is an elegant system of principles that I find to profoundly influence how I move through the world. And it influences all my vocational calling work, whether it's Project Drawdown or Lift Economy. These are the principles of how I navigate meeting my needs in the world. I use them as a language to inform my behavior and my choices. Do I do this or do I do that? The principles are guidelines for me as a design process. I might go into one of them for an exercise, but I just wanted to highlight that permaculture is a design system with an ethical boundary, with principles for helping us make decisions. And it can be used for a lot of things. A lot of people, some people know permaculture as a way of gardening, or maybe a way of farming, or somebody's like, oh yeah, permaculture, I lived in a straw bale home, I know what permaculture is. And so the techniques and strategies or artifacts that permaculture design might result in are oftentimes conflated with what is permaculture. But I tend to think of permaculture, and again, I notice that a number of you are super literate in this, but I think of permaculture as a design system, not the techniques, not the strategies. Permaculture is not sheep mulching. Permaculture is not food forests. Permaculture is not COP buildings. Permaculture is not CSA agriculture. Permaculture is, for me, a design system to use principles of design to meet human needs, all human needs, diverse spheres of application in a site-specific context. And so that might seem really abstract, and even when I say those words, that sounds super freaking wonky. So hopefully, maybe I could share what that means like in practice. So a permaculture designer, as somebody who's like vocationally doing permaculture design, might do urban planning or suburban planning or landscape scale planning. Where do we put things? Where do we put houses? Where do we put transportation? If there's light industry, where does it go? Or a permaculture designer might zoom in and do a specific landscape design, farm or ranch design. Where are the water catchments? Where are the pathways and roads? Where do we put trees? Where do we put gardens? Where do we put homes? And orienting them in ways, again, that can result in those outcomes that we associate with earth care and people care and fair share. Or a permaculture designer might zoom in and actually look at a block scale, or even a lot of permaculture designers that I know and that I've had the privilege to train and share with work in a low impact development design in urban and suburban environments, doing right-of-way design for rainwater, stormwater infiltration, and biodiversity enhancement in urban areas. Or, permaculture designers, some of them are architects and actually build and design homes for passive solar or for passive cooling, and actually lay out and design where is the bedroom, where is the kitchen. Or some permaculture designers I know design specific artifacts like a very efficient rocket stove or a compost toilet system for a multiple unit household, or a micro hydro, or some kind of diversified renewable energy system. And so permaculture can be applied in so many ways. It almost makes the term kind of useless, but I do hope that by sharing those examples, we don't conflate permaculture with just a way of gardening, even though food as a core human need is one of the most common ways in which permaculture is applied. But I wanted to introduce one of the principles and do a quick exercise, a little breakout in a moment. So in this image here, one of our principles in permaculture is, we call it thoughtful and protracted observation, or observe and interact. Or Bill Mollison, one of the co-founders of permaculture, talked about this idea of the problem is the solution, or the seeds of the solution are in the problem itself. And so I wanted just to go through this diagram real quick and then ask you a question, and we'll break out into groups. Hopefully this will be fun. So here's like a cup of tea, and any process or artifact, I'm just going to pick on tea for a moment. And so when you look at a cup of tea, you might ask yourself, like, where was the tea grown? And you start thinking like, okay, well, investigating it, there's a monoculture, some imposition on some people's land and living system, clear cutting of forest to put up Camellia sinensis, grow it with a monoculture. Well, monocultures of Camellia sinensis are not a natural artifact, if you will. So they're reinforced with pesticides or herbicides, which are derived distillates from fossil fuel. And so I'm thinking about this cup of tea, and pretty soon I'm thinking about fossil fuel extraction in the Middle East, or deep horizon wells in the ocean. And then I'm thinking about the box that the tea bag came in. I'm thinking about the clear cutting of second growth eucalypt forests in Central America, processed into pulped into cardboard to live its life as this box for a couple of weeks. And then I'm thinking about the water in my cup of tea. I live in San Francisco, and so I'm thinking of the water coming from 165 miles away through a pipe shed that was engineered about 85 years ago with an expected lifespan of about 80 years, and costs something on a magnitude of $1 billion every 3 years or so to maintain it, and runs across 3 major faults which haven't slipped in about 150 years. And so I think about those kind of things with the water. And then I think about like heating the tea, getting hot water. And I think about the grid mix for PG&E or SF Clean Power, and thinking about the nuclear facilities and the natural gas and the extraction. Does anybody, by the way, know where the natural gas, if anybody has a stove in the Bay Area, do you know where the natural gas comes from? Anybody maybe in the chat? Comes from Texas, likely. So just there, yes, is there fracking and natural gas extraction in California, Paso Robles, et cetera? Yes, but if the pipeline that likely feeds your stove in the Bay Area is traveling from Texas, that's a long way away. That's somebody's land, some indigenous people's land being fracked to be able to provide that hot water for tea. Okay, and then you toss the cardboard box in San Francisco, it goes into the blue bin, right? And it gets picked up by ecology, goes to a transfer station at Pier 96, is hand separated by humans in very degrading working conditions. And then it gets bundled, and San Francisco is one of the last remaining places on the West Coast. The largest export from the West Coast for the last 3 decades used paper. So it would be bundled into these packages and being shipped off to East Asia, unloaded in a container in these 1,000-pound bales. Where does the bale go? Does anybody know? Right, so it gets put on a truck or a train, taken to a reprocessing facility in the case of recycled paper. But of course, if even the best of recycling, that box, the 100% of that box doesn't make it into a recycled paper product, right? Reprocessing yields for paper are like 70%. So what happens to the 30%? It's landfilled or incinerated right there next to the reprocessing facility, another people's home, their land, their backyard. Recycling, in the case of the affluent world, is essentially landfilling or incinerating garbage in somebody else's backyard slowly. And then, of course, I drink the tea, and so I pee in that fresh water that costs billions of dollars to get to my home. And then I flush, maybe it's a modern toilet, 1.6 gallons per flush, and it needs to be treated. San Francisco's got a very sophisticated treatment system, average cost about $300 million a year to maintain it. Of course, if you live in Palo Alto, your sewage treatment facility that treats that urine is about 9 inches above sea level by the end of 2035. Anyway, okay, we don't have to talk about that. Okay, so there's lots to think about with a cup of tea, right? So my request is, I'm going to break us out into groups of, let's see, how many breakout groups? I'm going to break us out into 4 different groups. And the request is redesign tea. Just use your intuition. We can do better with tea. Any pieces of that, redesign it. Just think about it for a moment. What would you do differently? So that's the task. Is the instruction okay? Is it understand? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and break this out. Just for a couple minutes.
Can you repeat those or put it in the chat?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Karen, Tibet, hello.
Hi.
Hi, Tibet.
Hi, friends.
Hello.
It's been too long.
Yeah.
All right. So tea. Well, I'd imagine growing it in the yard using water that you've captured and you're filtering, that would shorten the process, and then peeing into a compost toilet.
Yeah. Or at the very least, buying it in bulk from a local grower.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. I get my tea from Good Earth. So, it's in glass jars. I do get it in a paper bag, but I compost that afterward.
Yeah. Hi, Claudia.
Hey, Claudia.
We already figured it out. Karen nailed it. So.
What were some of the other elements in the power, though? We didn't
Right.
talk about the power component.
Claudia, what Karen said is just growing it in your own yard, steeping it with water that you captured, and then peeing in a compost toilet. But yeah, the power, I mean, obviously it could be renewable, solar.
Solar panel there. And storage is all in glass jars. I mean, the question, the diversity of teas, I mean, you can certainly do it with mint, but is the tea bushel, which I know is growing very well in China. Has anyone grown tea? I personally haven't grown black tea, but I grow lots of things that can be used as tea, calendula.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of the question. The black tea would be more challenging.
Yeah, my favorite tea is from Kenya.
Right.
I don't know if I could grow it. Look it up. The agricultural zone.
Yeah. What are some other? I mean, I'm having dandelion root a lot these days, and I've tried digging it. It's a big job to dig it up and roast it and grind it down. It's going to be pretty committed to it. But what are some other alternatives to the tea from Kenya?
Yeah. Even something basic I do. I have all loose leaf tea. Well, not all. I'd say about 90%. So you just never get the tea bag in the first place. So you can use reusable metal. Right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna look at his picture.
I mean, for teas that we can't get here, you could find a like ethically sourced, regeneratively grown tea that is shipped on a boat that uses sails.
Yeah.
Sailboats.
Yeah.
That's good.
If we feel like we need the caffeine, we could try sleeping more or finding other ways to feel energized.
Right. And then in the city, I guess in the last couple of minutes, I mean, living in the city itself, maybe a community garden where the tea is grown.
Yeah.
And mixed.
Yeah.
I'm writing notes in
A
the
rainbow
chat.
light grocery where everyone submits their favorite tea and we, like Tibet said, do a bulk order.
Yeah.
And come with your reusable container to get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just, you know, it was such a comprehensive diagram, and I'm imagining it for every element. I mean, our computers, obviously, like it's going to be 10 times as big, right? The impact. So it's a really sobering thing to look at that full, you know, context and ecosystem.
I think totally. And I think, you know, we could even, how do you replant?
Okay. Welcome. So some questions that I have for you. Any to somebody in the chat or you unmute, what's one example that you came up with or your group came up with of how would we redesign it? Just one example.
I have our whole notes I could paste in.
Feel free to do that, but why don't you start with, before you do the whole notes, maybe one. How about one first?
Well, growing in your own garden is a really good place to start. Growing the herbs. Growing your own, right? You know, some people are surprised, you know, Camellia sinensis grows really well in the Bay Area. Of course, tisanes, there's so many different types of tea that we could grow, even tea plants with caffeine, like Ilex vomitoria. Worst species name ever, by the way. But Ilex vomitoria, the Yapon holly native to North America, is, in my opinion, as tasty as Camellia sinensis from a tea, and has a similar caffeine quality to Ilex paraguayensis or mate. But yes, grow your own. I just want to pause there for a moment, because that is the most common, you know, and when you analyze these types of industrial artifacts of the affluent world, just the simple idea of moving the point of production closer to the point of consumption, and in some cases growing or making our own or doing it ourselves, all of the externalities or all of the impacts start to dissolve when the point of production is moved close to the point of consumption. Does that mean we're all going to grow our own tea? Probably not. And is that what we're advocating for? Also probably not. But it's a very powerful insight that the seed of the solution could be found in the problem. What's one other example? Maybe somebody besides Tibet, and we'll come back to Tibet's full list from the notes.
You just get caffeine infusions.
Haven't heard that one before, but I like that. Right? Yeah. So I have heard somebody say, like, do we need to drink tea? You know, first principles. Like, okay, the cup of tea. That's the redesign it by actually questioning the entire enterprise itself. Tea's life.
What else? And what's another example? How else would you
Using a
redesign it?
compost toilet and distributing the byproducts. I mean, obviously the urine is fantastic for all the fruit trees and other parts of the garden, except for what you're eating, the leafy greens, but certainly other species love the nitrogen.
Indeed, yes. That's one, sometimes it's surprising to some people, but permaculture enthusiasts know it well, that there is an adage that you're in charge. And sorry, really bad pun, but this you're in charge, if you took the nitrogen and potassium content of human urine, which comes out of the body, pH balanced and sterile, and you were to buy that fertility content in the open fertilizer market, it's about 25 cents for a quart of urine. The city of San Francisco, we estimate, pisses away literally about $330,000 a year. Or a year, a day, excuse me. So, but that we don't recover that that fertility. But this idea of composting the leaves, right? There's so many different strategies here. We could heat the water by putting the tea in a jar and putting it in the sun. Or if you live in San Francisco, like I do, there is no sun, at least during the summer. And so you can harvest sticks from your tea plants and have a rocket stove and have a very efficient 87% combustion and have an efficient burn. There's lots of ways to heat water without gas from Texas. And, composting the spent leaves, absolutely. So we can actually recycle both the urine and the materials into the fertility to actually result in a greater yield of more tea plants in the future. We could capture the water off of our roofs rather than getting it from 165 miles away during the rain, and with simple filtration and treatment, treat it to make it potable. Lots of different options. What I hope is self-evident to you is like the solutions or the possibilities. On the one hand, like we know what to do when we look at the horrific set of consequences from the industrial consumer-oriented society, to reorient our habits and behaviors. Like what we need to do is pretty simple. Doing it, accomplishing that, the skills to learn how to grow tea, the space, the land, the access. Should we do it as a cooperative? Should we do it as an individual? Do I have time? I need to pay rent. There's 1,000 problems and challenges as to why this is not simple, but what needs to happen is actually embarrassingly simple. And I find intuitively, having presented this to over 1,000 people just over the last 15 years, we consistently get to the same set of solutions, even if they live on a gradient of possibility. So just wanted to check in. You go ahead. Is there a question coming up? Amy?
Oh, it's just so simple. Your other diagram is like this complexity of all these systems. And when we really just look at, taking things locally, like the simplicity of it is remarkable. And great to know my tea is so valuable.
Yeah,
Pay to pee.
Indeed. And that literacy of like, who knew that you're in charge? This idea of eco-literacy, so in alignment with bioregional identity and bioregional literacy, is there within the permaculture pedagogy. There is a lot that's just the study of relationships in nature. David Holmgren, who's one of the co-founders of permaculture and also one of my teachers, likes to say, as simple as possible, permaculture is remembering ourselves as nature. But there is like an onus, without our lived experience being immersed in the lessons of nature, sometimes using the language of science or the language that's accessible to us to understand ecology. There's a number of core concepts that permaculture utilizes, whether that's understanding succession. So if you want to understand fire ecology in the Mediterranean landscape, like in California, understanding how succession works, or if you want to know why it is that when you pull weeds from your garden, you create more conditions conducive to weeds, this understanding ecological succession is a powerful and profound lens to modify our behaviors for more abundance and regeneration, as just an example. But just understanding food webs and trophic cascades, these types of ecological concepts are core to a permaculture pedagogy to then be applied in different domains. So when somebody studies permaculture, as I know a number of you know, we study water. And so we look at from source to sink and, understanding even the hydrologic cycle and why is it foggy in San Francisco when the Central Valley heats up and hot air rises and this cold air gets breathed in and sucked in over the coast? Why does that happen? And understanding how rain works and how much water falls when it rains. Many people are surprised. I was surprised to learn that having been born and grown up in California, that California doesn't have a shortage of water from rainfall. It has a storage shortage. The runoff in California, we have a runoff problem, not a rain problem. California does have a desert, or it does have the Mojave Desert, but it's mostly just desertified. It's dry because we let the water run off. So understanding conservation hydrology, how to catch and store water passively or actively, how to reuse water through gray water, how to not use water through techniques like composting toilets, or dry farming. So many different aspects of water are part of permaculture, and understanding how water works in our lives, water being the limiting factor to life, enables us to be agents of regeneration and, again, increasing biodiversity elsewhere in our bioregion by how we treat water. And there's things we could do at home, there's things we could do vocationally, there's things we could do in our region in terms of conservation, hydrology, and restoration. And then there's soil. So soil is a big topic in permaculture pedagogy, and there's some like basic literacy about how to transform soil and how to maintain soil fertility. And a lot of that has to do with agriculture, but there's also remediation and toxicity and carbon sequestration, just the dynamics of how soil works and how as a living biogeochemical mosaic, an orgy of activity of life that is soil, and how necessary it is to sustain life. There's a lot within our permaculture principles about how we treat soil as a living entity, which it is. There's a lot in permaculture that privileges trees and their energy transactions. Sure, again, many of you are familiar with this. So and there might be words you're like, what is silvopasture? Or some of you might be, can somebody share what coppice is if they know? Either type it in or say, what is coppice? You know?
How do you spell coppice?
Coppice.
Coppice, an area of woodland in which the trees or shrubs are, or formerly were, periodically cut back to ground level to stimulate growth or provide firewood or timber.
All over the world, cultures partnered with trees in this way. And in our region, in our bioregion, certain trees, the bays, the willows in particular, providing for human needs through this treatment, this cutting back, this actually removal of the top growth, removing some of the carbon for fire load, but utilizing the willows for different types of materials, whether it's for basketry or whether it's for medicine or whether it's for food or whether it's for fencing or building materials. This idea of coppicing in different rotations in time and intimate knowledge and relationship, and that the cutting back and the harvest actually, there's a phenomenon with trees where if you take the top growth, I can't do it with my hands here, you take the top growth off and there's a reciprocal root death. That reciprocal root death sloughs off carbon into the soil. And so coppice is a way of pumping carbon into the soil for long-term storage out of the atmosphere and into the soil. And coppice is something that's part of all over the world. It's a human kind of pattern and something that we could do in our own landscapes. And in fact, when we don't do it and we lose that pattern of partnership with our trees, we ended up with these catastrophic canopy fires like we see in the California landscape without that type of partnership and utilization of the land. To know that the land is full of partners for meeting human needs, so much that we could do. Natural building, there's a whole focus in permaculture on human settlement and how we shelter ourselves. Quick quiz, either again by chat or what's the oldest building in San Francisco? Survived all the earthquakes. Anybody know? It's the Mission Dolores, right? The mission, what is it made out of? Ooh, Stephanie's right too. That's right. Does anybody know what the Mission Dolores is made out of? Sand, straw, clay, water mixed together. Very thick walls, of course. Yeah, adobe. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie. And so, and sadly, yes, the mission is a colonial imposition on the Ramaytush Ohlone, the Yelamu, the people of the Yelamu. And the principle of using the materials around us, whether it's, you know, the wood or even subterranean, partially subterranean structures of the Miwok and the Pomo, or the Kochkas that the Yelamu and the Ohlone people lived in, either as temporal or semi-permanent structures, learning from the utilization of the local materials and how to configure them for buildings that can passively heat and cool themselves, reducing our need for combustion or fossil fuels. Also, the idea that the buildings in the harvesting of the materials could actually enhance carbon sequestration and biodiversity and fecundity of the landscape around us, so that the materials themselves contribute to regeneration and can be a benefit to all life. Instead of housing being a destructive force, housing could be a generative type of activity. Depends on the scale and the materials and the placement. And of course, agriculture. So permaculture is mostly known for agriculture, so I might not say much here, but whether it's at various scales, whether it's at the home garden scale or in the broadacre landscape, or partnering with ruminants and the different types of landscapes, or in the urban environment, looking at our behavior, recycling of resource or waste. I'm going to pause for a minute. This is kind of getting towards the end of permaculture, but I want to see, these are just some images from some projects that the Urban Permaculture Institute created over the years in San Francisco. Let me stop sharing for a moment. I want to catch up on the chat and see what I've missed here.
There's a couple questions from Stephanie. One about what would be your solution for urine, using urine better. And then also a comment about rain catchment potentially being a problem.
Oh, interesting. I'll check that out. So first I'll start with the urine. Well, so I made light of San Francisco pissing away the fertility of urine in terms of its potential contribution to soil fertility. And whereas that nutrient in many places is pissed away, the range of solutions kind of, and so many solutions kind of falls on a gradient of what might be feasible today in reducing the harm, because too much urine, of course, and with the need for chemical treatment and primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment like the San Francisco, with again costing hundreds of millions of dollars a year. How can we avoid that? Well, the simplest way, like Tibet mentioned with the growing your own, the simplest way would be like what I do is I capture my urine, and I'm super privileged, especially in the Bay Area, to have a garden and a compost pile where I can utilize my urine to break down carbon into soil fertility that I can use to grow vegetables. Not everybody has that privilege, and especially in hyperdense cities like San Francisco, where you have 1 million people in 30,000 acres, 7 by 7 miles. And so what San Francisco does do with urine and all the flushed human feces and urine, it's a stormwater sewage system that's combined, and with its treatment facility, it actually has a digester that the solids with the nutrients that are gathered from the liquid components are digested anaerobically to partially power the treatment facility itself. Is that the best use of that material? I would argue not, but compared to many places in the world where we have unimproved sanitation, where the urine itself gets leached into waterways to create eutrophication. Cultural eutrophication is when nitrogen creates algal blooms that, as they decompose, take the oxygen of the water, all the dissolved oxygen out of the water, creating death zones, hypoxic zones where nothing can live, destroying the life of our wetlands and waterways, and contributing greatly to methane and nitrous oxide emissions to the climate catastrophe. And so there's a lot that we could do when I say you're in charge, and where we can in the world to take control of our urine. We have a lot of potential to solve many problems with one solution, but it's not always that simple. Adapting the principles in our literacy of how urine and nitrogen and potassium work in our agricultural systems and our land systems, adapting to the present conditions is part of the design piece. When I say permaculture is a design system, is if I just said everybody capture your urine and grow food with it, like that doesn't work for everybody for obvious reasons. And so I think there's this, like, how do we design it so it works for me today and for others over the long term? Let's see. Yeah, I love Karen. I just want to uplift your comment about to have more water, we need more fire. It's absolutely true. With the attempted genocide of the indigenous people in the American West and all over this continent has resulted in an undermanaged woodland and forest ecosystem, and the number of stems that have emerged through the encroachment, especially of the firs and conifers in certain areas over the oak woodlands of California in particular, have absolutely desiccated and dried up so many of the surface water features, the creeks and rivers and streams. So to have more water in this case, we actually need fire and regeneration. Let's see. Rain catchment is the problem if either it evaporates, runs off, or goes down to the water table or held in the soil for moving the other 3 ways. Right, so rain is a water, if catchment it creates evaporation. So like especially macro hydro dams, it creates, so catchment is not necessarily a solution in itself if we catch it and then just evaporate it into the atmosphere. And if we see the rain run off, especially if it carries soil with it into our water courses, and as it pollutes the salmon runs and destroys the biodiverse system, runoff is a big problem. We have a runoff crisis actually, and goes down the water table. If it goes down the water table, definitely without having it caught up in the cycles of life, that can be problematic, or just underutilization of the gift of the hydrologic cycle. I'm in alignment with that. These are great observations from Stephanie and Christine Jones. Let's see what else. Tibet, am I missing other things?
Let's see. There's a question about lift economy from Rains and how you integrate that with permaculture principles.
Yeah, great.
Claire was asking for standout examples of permaculture projects in the Bay Area, and what do you want to see more of?
I'll try and do both those. Maybe I have a few more images to share, and I wanted to also share the history of the permaculture community. I want to show like permaculture in action, and this is a site that actually, Claire, this is in Potrero Hill. I did kind of like an academic, I was so wonky and like curious, like how much vacant land is there in San Francisco? It's so dense. And so I did this like GIS study in 2006 of private and public land and tried to find out what if we put it into productive use? How much food could we grow? Because in this affluent city, there's 100,000 people out of 880,000 residents that still go malnourished and hungry every day. And I thought that was so obscene. I'm like, what can we produce food here? What can we do? And so I did this study, and the Chronicle picked it up. And the owner of this 5,000 square foot lot in Potrero Hill contacted me, and he's like, "Oh, I read about your thing and permaculture. Can you show me what it looks like?" And so we got together some students of mine at the Urban Permaculture Institute, and we did a design, and we took trash. We took the cardboard from the Whole Foods down the road. They gave us 1,000 pounds a day because they go through 6,000 pounds a day. And we would apply 10,000 pounds of cardboard, and we covered it with wood chips from landscapers. There's a big Bayview Green Waste in San Francisco, chips up landscape waste into wood chips. And so we laid it on contour in kind of berms on contour for raised beds on contour. And we planted them up with nitrogen fixing species. So this is about like October of 2008. This is like January of 2009. And we did a mosaic of nitrogen fixer pioneer species. And this is maybe February 2009. And in the first year, we grew about 1,500 pounds of food. So you can visit the corner of 18th and Rhode Island. And from $400 and some volunteer labor and trash, we created a site that today still reliably produces about 1,000 pounds of food a year, free to anybody who has a need, no questions asked. There's a number of homeless, unhomed individuals who visit St. Gregory's down the block there and walk by the site. And in many cases, with my conversations with some of them, this is the only fresh food that they have available to them. So this is permaculture design applied to urban food security in San Francisco. And it's freely accessible for you to visit and hopefully for you to eat from, as an example. There's lots of other sites in the Bay Area. Oh, somebody mentioned fire. I wanted to talk about fire a little bit, like as another example of how permaculture can be applied, right? So this commentary that we need more fire to get water. So another way of, besides burning, the indigenous burning at Lift Economy, per Rain's question, we work with the Tribal Ecological Restoration, TERRA is the acronym, and they're in Lake County, and we're working with them on projects in Mendocino County. So it's a tribal organization that is utilizing their indigenous wisdom, but in this case, they're doing a lot of thinning and harvesting the small diameter round pole timber and making products that could be integrated into the built environment, either as structural trusses to span long distances, which is an innovation that's relatively new and cost competitive with recycled steel, and also into cross-laminated timber and into round poles themselves, so that we can actually have buildings that might incorporate regenerative agriculture, which is something else Lift Economy works on, the straw from regenerative agriculture, embedded into buildings plastered with earthen plaster, the clay from the site where the buildings are rebuilt or grown. And it turns out that a earthen plastered building is actually doesn't burn easily. In fact, it actually vitrifies and gets stronger when the fire comes through. And so, you know, whereas we've lost 31,444 structures over the last 3 years to fire in California, and we will be rebuilding. Unfortunately, I suspect we'll lose more this year and for the rest of our lives. And due to sea level rise and other climate catastrophe, deep breath, there will be a lot of building that we'll be doing. But when we do build a building, imagine if we build all our buildings such that they are a carbon sequestration, biodiversity enhancing, watershed enhancing event, so that every single building is built as a contributor to resolving the problem of climate change itself. The organizing of the materials and the finance and the culture and the organizations of how to do that is an example of the type of project that Lift Economy works on. So Rain's applying permaculture to the work of the economy. I'm skipping through some slides because it's going to take too long to go through some of this stuff. But I'm so tempted to go through this, but I'm not. Another time. But the way we apply permaculture at Lift Economy is it informs. We use the principles of permaculture, not necessarily explicitly or as an articulation of our work, but we use it implicitly in all of our work. So I would say Lift Economy is an organization that's applying permaculture design to the transformation of the economy at large to work for the benefit of all life. I wanted to return to Claire's question of some sites, and this is going to be some of the history. Sorry, another time I'll go through this. I just skip slides. Oh shoot! So now I'm embarrassed. I forget what slides I have here. Okay, so oh dear, there's a couple more. Wait, sorry for the. There's so much to say. Oh gosh, more. One of the projects the Urban Permaculture Institute is working on is community-facilitated, community-led climate adaptation work in places like Marin City and West Oakland, East Palo Alto, where low-income communities of color are on the front lines and have contributed the least to climate catastrophe, and facilitating, using permaculture design, facilitating capacity building for those communities to design the solutions to the problems of extreme storm events, flooding, and sea level rise. Is some of the work of the Urban Permaculture Institute. Gosh, and I want to show. I know I have slides, Claire, with sites in the Bay Area. Oh, okay. So this was one of the asks, and Rains, if you're still on, you can get my back on some of this. I tried to put this together the other night for this presentation. Is permaculture related to bioregionalism and efforts around bioregional identity in the Bay Area. There's a long legacy of permaculture in the Bay Area, really starting, I mean, there's a pre-Permaculture Institute of Northern California and Penny Livingston and James Stark in the 90s. There's the Farallons Institute, now Occidental Arts and Ecology Center, the Integral Urban House in Berkeley, the whole Peter Berg Planet Drum work. There's a lot of that was happening that wasn't called as pre the word permaculture happening in the Bay Area, where even the term bioregionalism was popularized, and this idea of gathering an identity, of integrating our human colonizer occupier behavior into integrating it into the landscape was some of there's a lot of legacy of great work happening, especially in the 70s. Penny Livingston was kind of the mother of permaculture in the Bay Area, I'd say. And there were West Coast permaculture convergences that explicitly on the agenda. I've seen some of the flyers from those permaculture convergences in 1994, 95, and 96 were talking about bioregional breakout groups to connect and network a bioregional identity. Occidental Arts and Ecology Center at the site of the Farallons started teaching permaculture design in 1996. And there's so many other people to name, but I've listed some of the names of some of the people that were kind of contributing to the permaculture community, and all of them literate and enthusiasts around bioregional identity. The Greywater Guerrilla Girls come to mind as doing some really, and Babak Tandre, and who later created the Dig Cooperative. And Starhawk. Starhawk and Penny Livingston created the Earth Activist Training around 2000. In 2002, there was a Bay Area permaculture convergence that I bet Rains was at. I actually wasn't there. It was at Cell Space, and I've seen Jonathan Ute on these calls before. Jonathan actually hosted that event, and that was the first Bay Area permaculture convergence. Since then, there's been 12 more of them over the years in different locations. And I've listed some of the sites. And around this era, there was a kind of a permaculture guilds, the San Francisco Guild. We would meet regularly and communicate using email listservs, some of which are still, some of them have migrated to Hilo, some of them have migrated to Google Groups or Facebook. But the permaculture guilds were most active in my experience in this period. And I wanted to show like some of the sites, the Regenerative Design Institute in Bolinas at the Commonweal Garden and Alan Chadwick Garden, right on the mesa there is, I think, one of the most important permaculture sites in the Bay Area. And definitely, if you have a chance to connect with Anna O'Malley and the Natura Institute and visit that garden in any capacity, it's one of them. It's a move. It can be a moving experience, and it's a site where I was trained in permaculture when Penny and James moved to that land in 2003. The Occidental Arts and Ecology Center, formerly the Farallones Institute in West County, Sonoma in Occidental, a very important site. And if any of you haven't had a chance to visit yet, I encourage you to go. Amazing plant sales, amazing tours. The MA Center in Castro Valley is a place where Urban Permaculture Institute is a suburban area in Castro Valley, but that's where we do a lot of our training for broadacre work. Merritt College in Oakland, Chris Shine and Nick Bertulis and many others have contributed to the Merritt College permaculture site. Alameda Point Collaborative has a farm that was designed using permaculture design, and it's available to visit and volunteer at. The Permaculture Skills Center in Sebastopol on the Gravenstein Highway is another place to visit, not necessarily for public visits, but it is publicly accessible, and by arrangement, a self-guided tour is possible. This image, Wild and Radish, this looks like a drawing. A Wild and Radish in El Sobrante is another site that I think is a very important and a site that I would bring into the mix. And there's so many others, but just wanted to bring those to bed. Now I'm really self-conscious about time. Am I missing the chat? And I want to see what's coming up with questions and so forth.
There was questions about resources to find all these sites, and I asked if we could get access to the slides, if that's something you're willing to share.
Yes, will do.
I would actually say the Miro board map, bioregional map that we created a couple of sessions ago would be a great place to put all these ones if they're not already on there. So I'll share a link to that. Let's see, anything else? Marissa asked if you're familiar with the ecosystem restoration movement and your thoughts on their work.
Yes, thanks, Marissa. The eco restoration camps in particular, as the ecosystem restoration movement at large, I think maybe is a big superset, but the eco restoration camps, is that, Marissa, what you're referring to? Yeah, I think that organizing that John Liu and others have popularized this idea, informed by some of the documentation of ecosystem restoration from degraded sites to more fecundity and vitality in places like the Los Plateau in China, and in Kenya and other sites around the world, has spawned a movement of camps. If somebody has the link to their website, I think it's a good one. And Marissa, you may know more. Do you want to share, Marissa, about some of the California efforts? I know the effort in Paradise, and there's one down in Indian Canyon as well, near Hollister, but I don't know enough to speak super literally about I'm not super literate about the ecosystem restoration camps.
Marissa, you're muted in case you're trying to say something.
There you go. Okay. Well, I know that Nick Bertolis hosted the beginning of getting people ignited about this at Piscini's Ranch, who also does a lot of great facilitation. I know that the person that started that, Sally Calhoun, studied permaculture, and she helps facilitate learning there. But I went up to Paradise. They did that one. They've been up all around the state, and it's a really wonderful way to really be together with people and doing something constructively together and learning from each other. It's great, and I highly recommend. It's like you don't have to sign up for a class, which I also love, but I really think it's an interesting project to look into and learn about. We might actually be working with John Liu, making a film of some of the restoration camps, and there's a great video about some of the work they've done.
Thanks, Marissa. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
I'll just say, since we only have about 12 minutes left, obviously we can keep bringing in questions and continuing the conversation, but also if other people have announcements or updates or offers or asks of your own for related projects, and many of us are doing amazing work here, please jump in with those as well. And I'll kind of track and see if you could raise your hand or something. Marissa, I see your hand again.
I'm sorry. Well, we have an event tomorrow with Willa Rosenthal, who now calls herself Willa Summer, who started City Slicker Farms, and now she's gone home to Bodega, where she grew up, and she's doing biodynamic farming. So we're going to have a program. I just put the link in there for that tomorrow. I hope you can attend. It's for free, and she's just amazing, really. And then the other thing is I'm actually going to I could put a link in with Vital Cycles. Lydia Nelson and Anne Frywald and Della Duncan are hosting an event in Santa Cruz this weekend that's based on the work of Joanna Macy, permaculture, and it's also a lot about singing. It's called Hum, and you have to sing in it, which I don't do that well, but I'll put the link in there. Thank you.
Awesome. Amy, was that a hand raise? Or you're just saying Tibet?
Sorry. Oh, I was saying, if you could please put that link in the Facebook. It's just hard on the iPad to capture it anywhere.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then you're asking us to make announcements about things that we're doing.
Yeah,
we have started. Yeah, I'd love it. I'd love it. Actually, we started a lab with BeFlow. I've been developing a technology and tool to help track, report, verify sustainability claims for business investment and other things that are exciting for all of us to celebrate, and also the opportunity to start to form alliances and to see, the balance. It's like a checks and balances system. So we have started a lab, and if there are projects, I'm going to scholarship a couple of people. Bay Area Green Tours is one of our scholarships. So we're going to map everything going on with them, and as much as they want to use it. And I wanted to just offer that to this community. If we can help, we could even take that permaculture map and we can also put it into our map and add the SDGs and things like that. So just trying to make it available, and it's a very small group, so it's not something I'm broadcasting widely. So.
I guess I can do a quick share from the Hilo side. Yeah. And it's also awesome that Kevin has been such a great supporter, and Lift Economy has been using Hilo really actively. We recently secured an awesome partnership with Open Team, the open technology ecosystem for agricultural management and Regen network, to fund work on Hilo with a specific focus on building the tools needed for the regenerative agriculture movement, and for farmers to bring in data from different tools and sources and share information with each other, share best practices, build community with each other, and also for people to then connect with their local farmers and food systems. So really excited about the work we're going to be doing over the next year. And we're actually hiring for a couple positions. So I'll post the link here if anybody knows folks who are excited to get involved in building the kind of tech infrastructure for everything we're talking about. Also, feel free to keep asking questions of Kevin. We can keep the space just open for discussion as well.
It looks like this Regenerative Design Institute is permanently closed. So
Might be closed to the public. The Natura Institute's project of Commonweal, the nonprofit, still operates a healing practice and clinic out of there, and I would not be surprised if some time post-pandemic that it reopens to public tours. Yeah.
Anybody else? Final comment for Kevin could keep sharing all kinds of amazing things.
Actually, Betsy mentioned the Black Permaculture Network, and I did want to mention it. And you may have noticed that so much of the permaculture, if you look at the organizations, very white, and especially the rural centers that I do admire their work. The Regenerative Design Institute, Occidental Arts and Ecology Center. And, I mentioned at the top that permaculture, I think, could be accurately critiqued as cultural appropriation. And there have been efforts to both diversify and acknowledge the roots of permaculture in Afro-Indigenous wisdom traditions. And some of the efforts included in 2006, Occidental Arts and Ecology Center partnered with an organization called Movement Generation to create a program called Liberation Permaculture for BIPOC identified individuals in the Bay Area. And not long after that, my colleague at Urban Permaculture Institute, Pandora Thomas, started something called the Black Permaculture Network, a global network of Black permaculture practitioners and enthusiasts. And very recently, actually, Pandora, through her organization Earthseed, was able to acquire a farm, an orchard in Grayton in West Sonoma County, the Earthseed Farm, which is an incredible opportunity to create a living, learning Afro-Indigenous wisdom tradition center for BIPOC community in the Bay Area. And that's it's rather new, and so Pandora will be sharing much more about it in probably next year, as the Earthseed kind of center settles into its new home. But something to look forward to learning more about.
Really excited about Earthseed. Another project that you just reminded me to give a shout out to is The Refuge, which is a BIPOC-led farm in the Sierras that is currently raising money to buy the land they're on, as well as potentially a really big plot of land across the street, and create a beautiful vision and really wonderful humans running that as well.
Feels like these principles for permaculture, it would be phenomenal to expand them exponentially. I have to admit, I think I would have put 0.5 based on your all the learnings that I got today from where I started, and so I didn't realize it wasn't just agriculture. That shows my limited knowledge, but I think it's so important. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just say that I'm working on some full fire life cycle projects in a couple different groups, and I'm very new to the grant process since I come from the corporate world, but we're looking at doing some land-based, real connected, not just hypothetical stuff. I like working with different communities. So if people have interest or connections or whatever, I'm working with like 3 different groups. Talking with one in Sonoma, but also elsewhere.
I'm curious if there are permaculture classes resuming that are in person, because everything's been Zoom lately. Are you going to be launching your classes again, Kevin?
I haven't committed yet, Marissa, partially because the space that you you hosted us in was so wonderful, and yeah, I haven't found yet the right venue or timing, but I'm feeling it. There's a lot of demand. There's a lot of interest in doing a in-person permaculture training again through the Urban Permaculture Institute. So I'd like to imagine that maybe in the fall or maybe next spring we'll start doing it again.
I heard that Oak Stop is taking over the hub in
Okay.
Oak. I know
Okay.
you teach there, so, and they're great. So that might be a good resource to go back to now that we don't have an office anymore.
Thanks for the heads up on that. Yeah.
I have one final question for Kevin. And Kevin, I just want to thank you so much for being here and sharing all of that wisdom with us, as well as especially the intersectional perspective on permaculture, just like way above and beyond. And so informative. And definitely part 2 would be amazing. But my final question is just for everyone here and for the rest of our community that might view this recording later, what are some of the access points to get more involved with permaculture efforts that are happening in the Bay?
Yeah, it's a great question. And thank you also for inviting me and for everybody's attention. Really grateful to the Terran Collective for this type of organizing. It's really hard. All of you have tried this. It takes a lot of stamina. And I'm just deeply appreciative of the effort and the consistency, all the unseen effort. I'm just really grateful, and I want you to know that it's being seen and witnessed. In terms of entry points, this idea of the guilds, they've been a little quiet with the onset of the pandemic, but the East Bay Permaculture Guild, and maybe if Betsy or Rains are still on, could back me up here, I think have been gathering again. Or maybe Marissa, maybe you know. I believe the East Bay Permaculture Guild has been gathering at Place for Sustainable Living. It used to be the regular that the guilds would meet monthly, both San Francisco and the East Bay Guild, and the Sonoma County Guild. With the onset of the pandemic, those have been, I think, slow to recover. But the guilds have presence in different places. The East Bay Guild has a presence on Facebook, same with San Francisco Guild. And I could come up with those links. San Francisco Guild has slowly migrated. There was a Yahoo group with 1,000 people on it, and I attempted very clumsily to migrate to Hilo, but it does exist on Hilo, the San Francisco Permaculture Guild. I think I did a clumsy job of broadcasting that to all the 1,000 members. So it's a small group there right now, but I'd like to rebuild the San Francisco Permaculture Guild on Hilo. It's going to be a fall task for me. But that's a way. I'll come up with those links, and if I don't get them in time, we can see them on Facebook or wherever this might be posted.
One last question. Is there any talk of ever having a convergence again?
It's a great question for, the person I would ask would be Susan Silber of the NorCal Resilience Network, who was involved heavily with the organizers of the Convergence, Living Mandala, JMA, and them. And I think I would ask Susan to see if that discussion has reached any type of action. Yeah.
Not now.
Not now. Yeah. And thanks, Betsy, for saying the East Bay Guild has stayed in touch, right? Great. don't know the details. Well, I'll endeavor to get more details for our next one. So stay tuned. And it's a great question, Claire, and I'm totally embarrassed I don't have a good answer. But I'll get some posts up about how people can plug in.
Amazing. Yeah, that's great. That's a good start. And with that, I know we're over our 6:30 Pacific time, so I want to close up and again, just thank all of you for being here and coming on this journey with us and going on this exploration. And again, thank you so much to Kevin for everything that you shared. Just super, super educational. And I know our community is going to love seeing this. Yeah, so we'll be back next month. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you,
So good
Kevin.
to see you.
That's always so many good speakers.
All right. Bye-bye, all.
Bye. Thank you.